Talking Big Ten football schedules with Scott Dochterman coming up.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
All right, welcome in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is that you are listening or watching us today. We are pleased and honored on this Friday. Another guest on a Friday, Connor. I think we're like 5 for the last 5, but yes, we're pleased to be joined by Scott Dochterman, my colleague from The Athletic. Scott covers the Iowa Hawkeyes and college football and focuses a lot of his energy on the Big Ten, its history, and its big money decisions. So welcome, Scott. Welcome to the Locked On Nebraska pod.
Yeah, it's great to be with you guys, especially on a Friday, as you said. Now I'm 5 for 5, so now I have to live up to your other guests. But yeah, I'm glad.
I think you'll do fine.
Good to see you.
I think you'll do fine. So Thursday brought.
How appropriate, Mitch, that he joins us on a Friday with all the Big Ten Friday nights that we got coming up.
It is. We're going to talk about Fridays here during the show. Very, very good, Connor. So Thursday brought a whole avalanche of kickoff times and TV network unveilings for the 2024 football season. Scott, you were all over it, writing stories, podcasting, doing everything that you do. The big story came out Thursday afternoon on The Athletic to kind of to catch up on everything that happened. For Nebraska, we learned that UTEP in the season opener will be a 2:30 game on Fox, so national TV for Dylan Raiola's unveiling on August 31st. Week 3 against the FCS foe, Northern Iowa, is going to be a night game. We already knew that Colorado in week 2 was a night game. That's BTN on week 3. And then week 5 at Purdue for Nebraska is 11 a.m. And additionally, Black Friday in Iowa City this year is going to be at night. So we're going to talk about that, 6:30 p.m. on NBC. I wonder, league-wide, Scott, what were your main takeaways about what happened with these announcements here at the end of May?
You know, I've always been fascinated by these because of how they've progressed over the last, say, decade. And when you see this year, it's so different from what had happened in the past. It's kind of almost a shock to the system because, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, especially, the Big Ten would have like 5 primetime games, and then they looked at 2:30 as their primary viewing window, and the remaining games were on at 11 o'clock Central Time. And so if you were like on pins and needles hoping for that one primetime game that maybe happened by early October, and now you'd plan your whole year around that as being kind of the keynote or signature game of the year. Now primetime is just another window, and Friday night is now just another window. And when you have 15 Friday night games, and it was originally going to be 16, but then Rutgers moved its game from Friday to Thursday. It going forward, I mean, they didn't just like dip their toe in the water. They just dove right in. And there's 12 out of the 14 weekends include a Friday night game. And next year it'll be all of them. There were just 2 that kind of sat it out. And so I would look first at Friday again, even though we knew most of those last week. But the Black Friday thing, I think, was really fascinating for us. Of course, you guys have covered it your whole lives. And for me, the last, 14 years. But first time at night for this series. And second of all, the shocker to me was who was the curtain raiser that day. And that's Minnesota, Wisconsin, because back when there was that whole Mike Riley, Sean Eichhorst, we're leaving Black Friday before they got whacked. That Iowa then flipped over and was going to play Wisconsin late. And then Barry Alvarez was like, we're not playing on Friday. And now you're given tolerances, and they don't have tolerances for that anymore. So they're playing, and they actually have a heated field, so they'll be all right. But so there's a lot there. And of course, I'm kind of going all over the place, but I do think Black Friday developments to me were the most fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to go deeper on the first question. I want to get into, all the stuff that you mentioned there, including the tolerances, but like, what is Black Friday to the Big Ten right now? And I mean, like you said, it would have been difficult for me to imagine a world where Wisconsin and Minnesota were playing on Black Friday, a few years ago, and then Nebraska and Iowa obviously playing at night. You get a little Big Ten West flavor, old school Big Ten West flavor, I guess, that day. What went into the thinking of sort of packing that day, obviously surrounding an NFL game in the mid-afternoon with the Chiefs and Raiders that day as well?
It's something the Big Ten has always considered fertile territory, and that's what they've told me in the past. And but nobody had ever really approached it before, especially when the Big Ten used to end its season the Saturday before Thanksgiving. And then the year before Nebraska joined, they extended it to Thanksgiving. Then when Nebraska joined, Iowa and Nebraska decided that they wanted to try it on a 2-year trial basis and then continue it. But all along, the people who were in charge of TV scheduling with the Big Ten were always interested in that day. They said it's fertile territory. We're game if another team or another school or a couple of schools are interested in it. Nobody really stepped up. Well, in this new TV landscape that they're in with 3 linear networks and a high visibility, they not only want to be on Black Friday, but they want good games on Black Friday, games that matter. And last year we saw that with Michigan State, Penn State. Penn State kind of has a reputation of being difficult to deal with. And so they ended up moving that game to Ford Field in Detroit. And then this year, when you look at the schedule, I mean, Penn State's playing Maryland. Sure, if they would have raised their hand, they might have been able to do it. But they wanted a game that CBS would be happy with too. And obviously the Axe game, it's the most played rivalry in major college football. It usually means something, at worst bowl eligibility, at most, at the past it's been for the championship game in the West Division, and Iowa, Nebraska has a lot of equity with this. I mean, has good ratings, and they've been close competitive games for a number of years, and there is some sizzle, and I think there'll be more sizzle this year because it's at night. I mean, sometimes I don't know if you guys notice it. It's been important, but I think the day after Thanksgiving sometimes gives it a flatter atmosphere. I think having it at night in prime time will give it some more juice, and then the Big Ten also had to adjust it a little bit because of the Amazon game NFL kickoff. Yeah. So, and with Raiders Chiefs, they're like, hey, there's a real Midwestern flavor here, a lot of rivalry games. So they really liked it.
That juice might be ice at Kinnick at 6:30 on a Friday night after Thanksgiving. Connor wanted to get into tolerances, so I'm just going to steal his question because I'm interested in this too. There's been a lack of tolerance on the part of some schools in playing Friday games, and we saw and got the news a while back that Nebraska is going to get Illinois on September 20th, a Friday night at home. Not going to be the same kind of weather concerns that you have on Black Friday, but so there goes that. High school football in the state of Nebraska is going to have to adjust. What about the biggest names in the Big Ten, and what can we expect from them moving forward? You talked about Penn State, but what about Michigan and Ohio State and the prospects for Friday games that involve those teams, even in Ann Arbor and Columbus down the road? Where do you think that's headed?
I think it's pretty unlikely. The foursome on Fridays that are probably never going to get a game, or it'll have to adapt significantly in order to get a home game, I should say. Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and Iowa. And the first three is they look at it as you've got more than 100,000 people cramming in, and two of them are college towns. I mean, Ann Arbor and State College, and trying to adjust university and campus life with a game at the same time. And then trying to fill 107,000 or 112,000 seat stadium could be just an absolute logistical nightmare. Columbus is kind of along the same lines, even though it's a much bigger city. It's still, you've got university life going on concurrently with a major city. Iowa, it's because of the hospitals across the street. It's on game day, if there's an accident, instead of having ambulances, they have helicopters. And then they share the same parking lots with some of the biggest hospital complex in the region, let alone one of the best in the Midwest. So that one, they volunteered. We'll do Labor Day weekend, we'll do Thanksgiving weekend, but we can't do anything in the middle. The other ones, I would say Wisconsin and Nebraska are kind of in that same ballpark because they're in capital cities, they're larger markets than an Iowa City or an Ann Arbor or State College, and they have big stadiums that are filled. But that one, in the latest, it started in 2017, Kenny told me that in 2017, they kind of cut down some of the tolerances, like schools saying, we never want to play because of Friday night football. Well, that one's not really a relevant discussion anymore. Then it's about, we really don't want to host it because of a certain reason. Well, now, as long as you're capable of doing it and not disrupting and annihilating the day in your community, then you're okay with it. And then they're going to say you're on the list. And then it's just a matter of, how many times. They don't want anybody to have to do it more than once, a host. And I think, in Nebraska's case, that's once. But there are other tolerances that are built in. There could be overlap with certain events. Maybe, hey, this weekend's a really bad weekend. Maybe somebody has a concert, or, even the situation, and this is a TV situation with Washington and Washington State. They're playing at the Seahawks Stadium, which shares the same facilities as is it still Safeco Field? I can't remember. They changed names so often.
T-Mobile Park, maybe?
Yeah. Okay. T-Mobile Park. Yeah. I'm probably still at Enron Field for the Astros. but they share the same parking facilities, and that is I think it's a primetime game for the Mariners that night. And they had engaged discussions with the Mariners and Major League Baseball about moving the time of first pitch, and they said no. And so then Washington State has to be on Peacock in the midday, when in fact NBC would have wanted it as their primetime game. So you have all these things you have to deal with, and so Nebraska getting one game, while not preferable, it was one of those where, okay, we'll deal with it. And I think Nebraska should have a great environment, obviously, that night.
Yeah,
we'll have more on the Big Ten's puzzle, their never-ending jigsaw puzzle that they have to put together with Scott Dochterman coming up next. But a reminder to please subscribe, follow on Twitter at LockedOnNEB, and email us, of course, lockedonneb@gmail.com. We'll be back after this.
All right, Mitch Sherman here. I want to take a minute to tell you about Gametime, a sponsor of the Locked On podcast. We've been talking about the ease with which you can use Gametime to get Major League Baseball tickets for a while now. But Connor, I know you would love to go to the NBA Finals. So just get on a jet, get on a plane, go to Boston or Dallas. They're now set. Starts a week from yesterday, Thursday night. The Mavs closed out the T-Wolves last night. The Celtics await. Dallas is an easy flight from Nebraska. Maybe you're listening to this episode in Texas or on the East Coast and you're thinking about going to the finals. Start thinking about Gametime too. It makes getting tickets to the finals easier and faster than any other method. Prices on the app go down the closer it gets to tip. Take advantage of great last-minute deals, all-in pricing, seat views that you can look at on the app. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, quickly here before we get into more interesting scheduling nuggets with Scott Dochterman. So we have to flash back to yesterday. So yesterday we brought you the story that inside Nebraska volleyball coaches John Cook, his contract, they put it in so that he got a $70,000 bonus, and he will use that to buy what we said was a racehorse. It is actually a roping horse. So we
needs to be corrected.
Very clear right off the top here. We're trying to bring you the facts. He's not in the racehorse game. He's in the roping horse game.
We got called out on YouTube. So Need to get that out there. It's a roping horse. He's a cowboy. The 70 grand is going to a roping horse. So that's it. We've fixed our mistake. All right, back to Scott.
Yeah, back to good scheduling talk here. So there was a good nugget in your story, Scott, that you broke down on The Athletic. I would encourage people to check it out and just kind of inside and behind the schedule making process. So Nebraska, their opening game against UTEP, it seems like was actually involved in a trade between networks. It seems. Well, explain that for us a little bit, and how did it end up so that Nebraska got a big Fox game at 2:30 on opening week?
Yeah, this is one of the more fascinating developments because the Big 12's current contract with Fox is in its final year. And of course, we know the Big Ten's contract began last year, the different year. So there was an overlap of 1 year, and Fox and the Big 12 had it written in where they could have one more big noon kickoff. And in that mechanism, that when Big 12 had a kickoff, big noon kickoff, then there was a 2:30 kickoff that it would have on Big Fox for the Big Ten. Well, a lot of that was built in because Oklahoma and Texas, at the time, were still going to be a 2025 teams, right, the SEC, and they wanted to make sure that, hey, they wanted to get a good game if, when one of those two teams, or if possible. Well, as we know that they left early, they still had the mechanism in place. It was, a legacy contract. And it just so happened that for perfect purposes for the Big Ten and for Fox, that the season opener was West Virginia at Penn State. So they were able to grab that as a Big 12 game and big noon and have a team that they would have loved to have had anyway. And then it opened up their 3:30 slot alongside CBS. And CBS had the next pick and chose Ohio State, which is the ratings Goliath in college football. And then you look at the rest of the schedule for that week, and it was a no-brainer to go with Nebraska over some of the other teams that were available, simply because, Nebraska rates well, but also it was an FCS or it was FBS opponent. There are a lot of, including Iowa is playing an FCS opponent. A lot of teams are playing FCS opponents that week, so it made sense for them to go ahead and get it. So it's a good exposure for Nebraska. And the other thing, I don't think I put this in, but I thought was fascinating, was because it's Ohio State and Nebraska, the audiences don't necessarily cross over that much, that there's not overlap. Like, they would have felt really sketchy if it would have been Michigan and Ohio State at the same time on linear networks, just because there is a lot of overlap there, where there's less so here. And plus they're playing FBS opponents, G5 opponents. So it's not like they're playing too good, marquee opponents. But it is a fascinating development. All these little nuances are, they kind of go into the schedule making process, and they matter in the big picture.
The draft itself is just such a, I don't think people have a great understanding of how it works. And the fact that there is like this trade between the networks is I find it, as you said, fascinating. A question for you, Scott, about week 2. And you mentioned talking with Kerry Kenny, who's the scheduling czar for Big Ten football. How does the Big Ten feel? You shared some of this with me yesterday, so I have a sense of what the answer is. But how does the Big Ten feel about the attractiveness of the matchup that it's getting, that NBC is getting with this Saturday night? No, that's is that NBC, Nebraska, Colorado? It's Saturday night, 6:30 p.m. in week 2, Colorado at Nebraska. What does Kerry think about that?
I think that's the first time I've ever heard a league official reference message boards as something to influence a decision or give them some excitement. You said, from reading the Nebraska message boards, that people are really excited about playing that rival. And then, of course, you look at Dion and what he's done at Colorado, and there couldn't be more juice surrounding that game. And through the draft, I think Texas, Michigan, like Fox got the first 3 picks and then number 6 overall in the draft, which was shared by Mike Mulvihill with Joel Klatt a week or 2 ago. And Texas, Michigan was the second pick from Fox. The first one, of course, Ohio State, Michigan. You don't ever touch that. But And so NBC obviously had number 2 and happily scooped this up because Colorado rated off the charts. I mean, Nebraska, Colorado last year rated off the charts. And now you're talking about, frankly, a better environment, prime time. You're going to get, 85,000 people there, whatever the capacity is now with all the renovations.
It'll be full for that one. Some of these games aren't full when they say they're full. That one's going to be full.
The tickets are bought, as they say. There, I can vouch for Iowa men's basketball that the number was half of what was announced. But this one will be absolutely full, and people will be watching it intently. And so I think you've got that atmosphere coupled with the juice, and then they're aware of it. I think it's going to be, really interesting. And then the number 3 game that was selected by CBS, has some similar overtones in Iowa State at Iowa, because it's in state. Both teams have a chance to be ranked, and of course that is an intense rivalry game where usually 25 to 30,000 people go to the game site without actually going in the game.
Right.
Scott, I want to take a peek at Iowa in a second, but one more scheduling question before we get there. So we wanted to zero in on November 2nd. You wrote about it in your story and how just stacked of a day that is for the conference and how many possibilities there were. We have, USC and Washington, Oregon and Michigan, Nebraska and UCLA, Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, Iowa, all on that day, on November 2nd. Somebody might move to Friday, or maybe that's been announced already and I just can't remember it off the top of my head, but huge day. How easy or difficult does that make the scheduling czar's job on a day like that?
It's kind of in the middle, and it's strange because it is the one true Big Ten part of the schedule where there won't be a Friday night game, which is unusual for a lot of reasons. You'd think that there would be one, but there isn't. But this goes to the 12 to 6 day pick, and Fox has the number 1 that week, but adding another level to it, and this is why there isn't a Friday night game, is it's right before the election. So there's programming on Fox and other networks that they don't want to break into it. And, it's obvious. And then you look at the matchups. I mean, 2 matchups that, Kerry said would have been announced in years past, during the upfronts would have been Ohio State, Penn State, or Oregon, Michigan. And network would have been thrilled to say, we're airing that in prime time or big noon or whatever. But both of those games, they don't know who's going to be the better teams. I mean, Penn State could be undefeated, and maybe Oregon knocks off Ohio State, and Michigan's still undefeated. So you could have, Fox may want to pick one or the other. Then you have the outside angle, which is there's ads to be made. And in Ohio, certainly Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin are all, bellwether and very impactful election states. So advertising rates will go up. And so they look at the business side of this as well. And so that's why this one is really taken all the way down to the end. And you look at, again, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon and Michigan will lead any week. And then, as Kerry and I talked a little bit about, Wisconsin, Iowa is a huge rivalry game. USC, Washington's got some juice. UCLA, Nebraska is a great helmet game, as they say. 2 teams that are well known. Even Indiana and Michigan State are, they play for a really interesting trophy in the brass spittoon. And Michigan State has, and that's going to be a huge election state. So you have all these elements in play. And so it bears watching. But I think the Oregon-Ohio State game a couple weeks before that will bear as to who picks what that day.
Nebraska and UCLA maybe need to start a trophy game to add just a little more flair to that series in the future. There's some history there. I'm not sure what they could come up with, but I know UCLA might have some ideas that are different from what Nebraska's thinking. But that's a big one for Nebraska on November 2nd, part of just a huge week in the Big Ten. We're going to come back after the break and talk some about Iowa, what's going on in Iowa City this offseason. But first, if you are watching TV all day and you have to turn down the volume because of the shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today delivers can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay, back for a final segment with Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. And Scott, your day job with The Athletic, your main gig is covering Kirk Ferentz's team in Iowa City. Of course, a ton of crossover into the Big Ten stuff, as we've been talking about throughout this episode. But Nebraska people have a lot of interest in what's happening there with their permanent Big Ten opponent. So catching people's attention this spring, I think we know about Cade McNamara coming back at quarterback from the injury last season. Iowa's had some portal departures, and in comes Brendan Sullivan, the transfer from Northwestern. So what's going on at QB for the Hawks as we get into the summer months?
Had a lot of turnover at that position. They've had 3 departures at quarterback, including Deacon Hill after spring football, and only one person on. Yeah, and he played. He competed last year. He took snaps last year. I'll just say that. And he's now at Utah Tech. So Cade McNamara is continue to rehab his torn ACL, which happened last September. He should be back for completely ready in June for workouts. He is the number one. Kirk Ferentz has said that even after Brandon Sullivan's addition at quarterback, who started 4 games last year. I think it was 4 for Northwestern, has started 8 in his career. It gives Iowa a much better option than what it had last year when Cade McNamara went down. My guess is with Tim Lester, who's the new offensive coordinator, that they will go in with Cade McNamara as the starting quarterback. He will be given every opportunity to start, probably start no matter what happens in camp, at least the first game. But Brendan Sullivan will have an opportunity to compete too. And if Tim Lester believes he's the best person for the job, then, ultimately Kirk Ferentz will have veto power, but my guess is that he will be given that opportunity at some point. So it should be a better competition, hopefully, for Iowa, that that they complete more passes. Because it was dreadful last year. And kind of hand in hand with that is they've had some departures at wide receiver. And that seems to be an area that I think is the biggest deficiency on the Hawkeyes offense, because tight ends, they have one of the best in the country in Luke Lachey. They returned 155 starts up front. I think this scheme is going to be beneficial to the line because with more of the motion, they've actually been able to gain some yards in spring football, which rarely happens against this defense that returns 6 players who were, in their extra year of eligibility. And finally, I think they have some really good running backs. So it's really going to be about the passing game as to whether this team is an 8-win team or a team that could be on the fringes and competitive for, maybe even a playoff spot.
Scott, how excited are you to not answer questions about Brian Ferentz all year?
It's the best part of my week right now that you've said this. I am thrilled because it's been just this constant drumbeat, and especially last year when the drive for 325 happened and the negativity. Oh yeah, it was fun to, I'm sure, for everybody else to watch, but to hear it every day and hey, what is going to happen there? And it's kind of like, all right, come on. And then the fans were understandably beyond words pissed off, because he was still there. They're like, what does a guy have to do to lose his job, right? And finally, with this all happening, it's allowed there to be some normalcy. It's now we're talking about football and not, Brian Ferentz constantly. So I think overall it's been positive. I was in LA last week for the Big Ten meetings and actually rode with Kirk Ferentz to the airport and sat for about an hour. And he seems more relaxed than just about the last 3 to 4 years. Just because
you guys share an Uber? What's going on?
Yeah.
Back up for a second.
Yeah. We were on the same flight. We went to Denver and then we went to the Cedar Rapids on the same flights and ran into him the first day there. And we were talking about, hey, we both have flight at the same time. He's like, hey, you want to just share a car? And I'm like, sure.
He's a man of the people. This just validates it even more. Ryan Day, he had a limo, I'm sure.
There were a few people out there. Kirk had like a nice Suburban that picked him up and took him there. I mean, almost presidential. But no, the one thing that I knew the separation was there was I think it was on the second flight from Denver to Cedar Rapids, and we're walking in. We actually sat together at the terminal and went on the plane at the same time, and then. I was walking in, he was right behind me, and he's just like, all right, I'll see you later. He's in first class front row. I'm in the back row. So I'm like, okay, this is where the separation starts.
Right.
Perfect.
Right.
It's perfect. Tells the story completely. Scott, this has been great. Thanks for doing this. We appreciate the hard work on the schedule as your job now maybe softly goes from schedule talk, Big Ten stuff into Iowa, but I'm sure there'll be more Big Ten governance stuff over the summer.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and hope everybody has a great weekend.
Yeah, next time we'll talk more about how Iowa's going to replace Tory Taylor, the insurmountable task in front of the Hawks. But no time left for that in this episode. That's 30 more minutes.
Yeah, it's been questioned.
A whole other podcast.
A quick reminder before we get out of here that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on the Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app.